Welcome to Daily Dose Radio, a 5-minute devotional podcast studying the Psalms verse by verse. Broadcast from the ever-beautiful Sharonville, Ohio, on the sunny side of Cincinnati. Hey there, friends. Welcome back to Daily Dose Radio. This is your home for organic Bible study that's fresh and delicious. It's all natural, no artificial ingredients, and minimally processed. Today, here in the Bible Bistro, we are looking at Psalm 101, verses 6 and 7. And, by the way, happy 4th of July. I hope you took me on your trip. Are we in the car? Oh, I love this part of the drive. Yes, sir. For my American listeners, happy 4th of July. For the global listeners who are not in the United States, today is our Day of Independence, and we celebrate with all kinds of fun things, including great Bible study podcasts like Daily Dose Radio. Well, we're looking today at verses 6 and 7, and let me just read those for you. Mine eyes shall be upon the faithful of the land, that they may dwell with me. He that walketh in a perfect way, he shall serve me. He that worketh deceit shall not dwell within my house. He that telleth lies shall not tarry in my sight. Now, yesterday we talked about the associations and the things that need to be cut off. Remember, he said, whoso privately slandereth his neighbor, him will I cut off. Well, we actually have been doing a lot of cutting off, because you go back all the way up to verse 2, I will walk within my house with a perfect heart. I will set no wicked thing before mine eyes. So the very first thing we find out is that there's some things that I need to exclude from my walk. My discipleship is so important to me and to my relationship with the Lord that there are things I need to discriminate against, to cut out. Remember, Jesus told us in the Gospels, in the Beatitudes, in that section there, 5 through 8, in Matthew's Gospel, he said, if your eye offends you, pluck it out. If your hand offends you, cut it off. This idea of the radical difference between the believer and the non-believer is very important. If a believer strives to look like the world, then they don't look like a believer, because a believer doesn't have friendship with the world. So that's enmity with God, James tells us. So we have to be very careful about who we associate with and what we allow in our life. So this discipleship psalm, this disciples' confession to the Lord, it can be ours if we're willing to do the hard work to discriminate against certain things. Now, here in verse 6, he's not discriminating against. He's telling us what he's going to include. Mine eyes shall be upon the faithful. Now, in verse 3, he told us his eyes would not see or would not have a wicked thing set before them. Now he says, mine eyes shall be upon the faithful. So we know what he's not looking at. Now he tells us what he is looking at. I'm looking at the faithful. Those that are faithful to the Lord, that's the faithfulness he's talking about. They will dwell with me. He that walketh in a perfect way, he shall serve me. Now, who's walking in the perfect way? Well, David's trying to, because he says there in verse 2, I will walk within my house with a perfect heart. And in the first part of 2, he says, I will behave myself wisely in a perfect way. So these are the people, the believers, who are trying to walk with the Lord. And David says, in my house, there will be those that are faithful. I will look to them, and those that walk in a perfect way, because, of course, that's the theme here. This discipleship, it's very important. Then we have the contrast. We go back to those that are being excluded. He that works deceit shall not dwell within my house. Now, he just told me that in verse 6, the faithful of the land, they will dwell with him. Now he says, those that work deceit, they will not dwell with him. We see the contrast here between the two. Then he goes on to say at the end of 7, he that tells lies shall not tarry in my sight. You notice how much the tongue is an interesting barometer of the wicked and those that are grossly outside of God's way. Look at this. In verse 7, it's he that tells lies. And then in verse 5, it's he that privately slanders his neighbor. The language here and it identifies these people that David says he's going to exclude himself from. I hope you had a great 4th of July. I hope you took me along with you. And now tomorrow, July 5th, we will look at verse 8 on Daily Dose Radio. Thanks for listening to Daily Dose Radio. I'm David Smith. The music today has been performed by the Bluegrass Experiment. Thanks again for listening. I'll see you next time on Daily Dose Radio.